All right, we're live. I would like to just say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us for our weekly MindCORE seminar series that runs every Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. We're thrilled to have another new Penn faculty member and MindCORE faculty member with us this week, but I won't talk about her because we have Professor Gareth Roberts who is going to introduce her. I just want to touch on a few little, oh, yay, we already have a question, although maybe it's not about the, let's see. Oh, is this true? You cannot hear sound. Is this true for anyone else?
I can hear you.
Okay, we've got some others. Looks like others can hear us. So Jillian, I think it might be on your side. So in terms of other questions, Jillian figured out how to work this, but unfortunately I can't give her a successful answer. If you have any questions during our talk, you're welcome to just post kind of questions like I can't hear in the chat function. You're also welcome to post any kind of claps or smiles in here as well. And then if you have a question for our speaker, use the ask a question function, and there's an opportunity for our other attendees to upvote questions, and that will ensure it gets asked at the end. And so I think that is it for my intro, and I'm going to hand it over to Gareth.
Great, thank you. Also thank you all for coming. I'm really delighted to introduce my colleague, Professor Nicole Holliday. And I also have to add, by the way, how delighted I am to call her my colleague. So Nicole interviewed with us pre-pandemic, but joined Penn faculty mid-pandemic. And I'm sure I speak for everyone else in linguistics and a number of people outside linguistics at Penn in saying, I really hope we can all get to be in the same building at the same time at some point and welcome her to Penn in person. So before she came to us, Nicole was an assistant professor at Pomona College for 3 years, having previously been a postdoc at the same place and having completed her PhD at NYU. And if you don't know Nicole, she does really fascinating work on sociolinguistic variation, and she's done quite a lot of work in particular on prosody, so intonation, that kind of thing, for those of you not in linguistics. And she's done a lot of work as well, in particular on the speech patterns of Black and biracial people. So to give you an example of a paper bringing these things together, the most recently accepted paper on her CV is entitled Intonation and Referee Design Phenomena in the Narrative Speech of Black/Biracial Men. Nicole also makes regular media appearances. Some of you may have heard on the Botal Fries podcast, for instance. Her most recent appearance was on NPR just over a week ago, talking about what it means when Republicans attack cancel culture. And engagement with the media is related to the way that Nicole's work often makes connections with contemporary politics. Some of it shedding light on how politicians use language to reflect their identity in dynamic ways. And this has other advantages, of course. So if you're interested in the speech of public figures, you have a lot of data available in the public domain. And this is also data which other people can look at and listen to themselves. There's a kind of open science component here as well. Last year, for instance, Nicole published a paper on Barack Obama's prosody. And today, I'm really excited to say, and I'm really looking forward to it, she's going to talk to us about Kamala Harris and the construction of complex ethnolinguistic political identity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gareth. It's lovely to be with you all in virtual space anyway. And that is the most up-to-date introduction I think I've ever received. So thank you. That paper about the narrative speech was accepted literally 10 days ago. So Gareth's been staying on top of my CV, and I appreciate that. All right, so yeah, today I'm going to talk to you about some of my favorite work that I've ever done, talking about vice presidential, oh my God, I was calling her candidate. No, she's the vice president, Kamala Harris. She is a fascinating subject. I could give a whole talk in GIFs. Maybe one day I'll challenge myself to do that. But her speech has been a subject of intense public interest. This is from the VP debate that she had with Mike Pence, where he kept interrupting her and she was not having any of that. So I want to just talk to you. We got to start whenever we have a sociolinguistic subject. Who is this person? You might be familiar with her. She's the 49th Vice President of the U.S. Before that, she was the U.S. senator, one of the US senators from California. And prior to that, she was the Attorney General for the state of California. She is 56 years old, and she's originally from Oakland, California. Her mother immigrated from India, her father immigrated from Jamaica. And she frequently highlights these parts of her biography and makes explicit reference to her multiracial and multicultural family and identity in this sort of overt performance of who she wants us to see her as is reflected in her linguistic performance as well. She has a bachelor's degree from Howard University. That's a historically Black university in Washington, D.C. This matters because it is one of the things that she leans into as part of her African-American identity performance. And her law degree is from UC Hastings. That's in California, obviously. And this is important for the same reason. So what we know about Kamala Harris is, I'm sorry, I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if that's on my end. Okay. What we know about Kamala Harris is she frequently highlights her African-American identity as well as her identity as a Californian. And that's what we're looking at today. So I'm going to talk about some aspects of a corpus of debate speech from Harris's 2019 presidential campaign. And we're going to have three ways of looking at persona construction and ethnolinguistic performance of aspects of her political and social identity. So we'll start just taking a quick look at some vowels in a variationist context. Then we'll have an issue-based analysis of her intonational variation. And then at the end, just a little hint of some morphosyntactic features. So a multi-level analysis of what is going on with her as a speaker and political figure. Why are we interested in these variables in particular? I'm building on the work of Lehman Smitherman. They have a book from 2012 called Articulate While Black, and they use Obama as a case study to demonstrate that people respond to variation on levels of conscious and unconscious awareness. For the vowels, we know that vowel variation is key in the history of sociolinguistics. Vowels are very well studied, particularly when folks are interested in differences by region, class, race, gender, all of the sort of standard demographic categories. I'm interested in intonation because it's dramatically understudied for sociolinguists, but it's highly salient in ethnic identification with important social consequences for speakers. So this is access to jobs, housing, employment, all kinds of things like this. And so this is why I love intonational variables, basically, is because we don't know anything about them, but they're very important. And we know that they are a robust site of variation. And finally, the morphosyntactic variables as highly salient markers of African-American language, and in particular, what Arthur Spears called standard African-American English. So that is a variety characterized by intonational features associated with AAL, and also characterized by the absence of stereotypical morphosyntactic features. So a little bit to give you some background on the way that I'm thinking about identity, the sociolinguistic perspective I'm starting with. I work in audience design, which says that variation derives from social group differences, and speakers use context and personal differences in conversation. So this is a method, a framework pioneered by Alan Bell. And in particular, he posits that individuals design their speech around their real or imagined audience. For politicians, it's very easy because we know who their real audience is, and we also know who their imagined audience is, right? The voters. And we know that language in general, and specifically segmental and suprasegmental phonological variables, are useful in constructing a specific type of persona. So Rob Podesva's work on the speech of Heath, who is a young, gay, white doctor, and how he can construct a diva persona in particular situations where that's the part of his identity that he wants to highlight. He also has a professional identity that looks different. And that work I build on for sure because he's looking at the use of falsetto phonation, right? So these suprasegmental features that are kind of aligned with some of the ones that I'm interested in. I'm interested in this with Kamala Harris because of her position. She experiences social pressure to do all kinds of identity work simultaneously, right? So it's very important that she's Californian. She was the senator from California. It's very important that she's Black. It's very important that she has immigrant parents. She has to avoid negative stigmas attached to her African-American immigrant identity. She's also a Democrat, right? So how does she do all of these things in constructing a persona that appeals to voters and a variety of voters at the same time. A little bit about what I mean by persona. We know that speakers evoke particular personae in specific moments, which is how listeners come to understand social meaning of variables and how that meaning indexes social categories. So we're always kind of imagining a persona when we hear speakers. Linguistic style allows speakers to exploit a continual reproduction and reinterpretation of these personae, such that styles become recognized as distinctive by being mapped against established norms, routines, or precedents. But because speakers and listeners are aware of this personae, and we use them to place individuals in a social landscape, it creates a complication for speakers who break our molds, right? So Kamala Harris is not like any politician we've seen before. We don't have a lot of exposure to upper middle class Black women in the public sphere. So all of our ideas about what a politician sounds like, what a Black speaker sounds like, what a speaker who's a second generation immigrant sound like, are kind of novel for her because of the combination that they exist in because of her position. There's been some recent work focusing on politicians as sociolinguistic subjects due to the fact that their speech is nearly always monitored and their persona construction is more explicitly framed as such. So we can't be in the minds of every speaker that we have in a sociolinguistic interview, right? We get them for an hour and they tell us what they tell us, but their motivations are not always transparent. I like studying politicians because you know what they're trying to do. They're trying to get elected, right? Hall Liu et al. Find that vowel choice and quality in loanwords can be used to align oneself with a particular political party. So if you are familiar with this work, this is the Iraq vowels paper. I don't even know how to say that country anymore because of this paper. But basically, we find that Democrats are more likely to say Iraq, Republicans are more likely to say Iraq, and they describe this as a sort of stance-taking alignment, persona construction, alignment with their political party. In my earlier work on Barack and Michelle Obama, I find that they use rates and internal linguistic contexts for coronal stop deletion to index informality as well as reflect their positions as linguistic subjects. So we have a little bit of work looking at politicians. It's becoming more popular as we go along here. And in particular, looking at Black female politicians, they have been a subject of particular interest due to their positions, their unique positions, kind of what I was alluding to before. So Podesta et al., on which I'm building a lot of the work today, examine Condoleezza Rice and find that she constructs a specific persona and style indexing her education, her multi-centric regional identity as both a Southerner and a Westerner, and a Black professional identity via the use of specific phonological phenomena, including the low back distinction, low back vowel distinction, oo fronting, and R vocalization. In Rachel Weissler's 2017 work, she examines Omarosa Manigault. Omarosa was one of the first superstars to come out of the Trump universe. So she was a winner of one of the early seasons of The Apprentice, and then later became a White House advisor because that's how that administration did things. She turned on Trump and left and gave a lot of interviews that were very critical of him. But she is kind of in the political sphere, so to speak. Rachel Weissler finds that Omarosa uses variable T productions to align herself as professional, populist, and authentic in a manner that's conditioned by topic and context. So we have some precedent for the kind of analysis that I am going to talk to you about today. For Harris, to begin with, we're starting with a possible universe of features from 3 varieties. So she's got mainstream US English by virtue of her position. She has California Anglo-English, I think, and African-American language. Her public position also means she experiences social pressure to be liked. So some of the theories of vocal attractiveness are also relevant. So what does it mean to sound likable? We know that African-American language is really well studied, but stereotypical speakers are overstudied. So when someone says, you know, imagine a picture of an AAL speaker, people don't usually start with Kamala Harris, right? The people they imagine are young, urban, straight, Black men. And she's not these things, right? So If we're looking at her as an AAL speaker, the picture is a little bit more complicated. And this is true not just for her because of her position, but also the fact that multiracial Black speakers are particularly understudied. In my 2016 dissertation, I found that Black, white, biracial participants in DC use intonational variation in a way that reflects their agentive sociolinguistic position. So presumably this is something that could be going on with Vice President Harris as well. In my 2020 study with Jason Bishop and Grace Kuo, we found that Obama uses AAL prosodic elements for stance and alignment as part of his ratio-political linguistic identity. So this works for Obama as well. If all of this holds for Harris, she may be especially likely to shift variables as a result of her own identity and performance goals in specific discursive moments. The data for this study is a corpus built from the first 5 2020 Democratic presidential debates. All of these happened between June and November of 2019. So this is when she herself was running for president in these kind of chaotic debate contexts. There's an hour of speech from Harris in total, approximately 12 minutes per debate. She gets a little more on the back end as people were eliminated from the process of running for president. There were many people to begin with, and they disappeared. She ended her campaign in December of 2019, so we don't have her in debates later than that. The corpus has 2018 intonational phrases that are longer than one word. And they were transcribed and annotated in Prot. I will say that this data is a little imperfect for acoustic analysis. It has a lot of speech overlap. You can imagine what happens in a debate context. They're mic'd, but they're in big halls. There's interruptions from the audience. And so this is not all of the IPs that she was speaking in these debates. It's just the ones that were good enough to capture what we were looking for here for acoustic analysis. I just want to play you a quick clip in case you haven't heard Kamala Harris lately. Hopefully the audio will work on this. Let's do it.
Because when black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth in America, when the sons of black women will die because of gun violence more than any other cause of death, when black women make 61 cents on the dollar as compared to all women who tragically make 80 cents on the dollar, the question has to be, where you been and what are you gonna do? And do you understand who the people are?
So I picked this clip to give you a feeling for sort of how she talks in the debate context, but also to give you a sample of what her identity construction looks like in an overt way, right? This is a very frank discussion of race in a context where she is, I think at this point, the only person of color on the stage because Cory Booker and Andrew Yang, I think, were already gone. So she's very explicitly telling you how she is aligning herself. So the first piece of this analysis, quick look at her vowels, right? Where are we starting with? Sociolinguists love vowels. They're a primary site of both regional and ethnic variation. Also useful specifically in persona construction. They're highly salient for listeners and frequently the subject of overt commentary. The California vowel shift in particular, which is one thing that may be operational here with Harris because she is a Northern Californian, appears to be fairly enregistered, at least for some types of personae. So people can hear some features of the California vowel shift and go, oh, that's a Californian. For Harris, there are some complications related to comparisons to canonical or iconic speakers, as well as a lack of data from speakers comparable in age, gender, education, and race. So most of what's been written about the California vowel shift has looked at white speakers, has looked at young white speakers. So it's not really the case that there is a data set that we can compare her to that has multiracial 56-year-old Black women from Northern California. But we'll just kind of look for how her vowels align with some things that we know about the California vowel shift. So for the vowels, following the methods of Podesta et al. And their work on Condoleezza Rice, I take vowels as a site for constructing speaker-specific regional and racial identity. So we did vowel alignment and form extraction conducted with Darla, the semi-automated process, and then we hand-checked them due to recording quality and overlap. There were some issues, as I mentioned before. There's a qualitative examination of the tokens here, 2,451 tokens here, comparing to patterns characteristic of the African American vowel shift and the Northern California vowel shift. So here on the top right, this is from Eckert 2008. We have a schema of what should happen in the California vowel shift. So the back vowel fronting that is frequently discussed, the fronted oo, and o centralization. We have low back vowel raising of ah, and then some kind of interesting low front phenomena, right? So moving forward, moving down to a moving to a, and then also bit lowering to bet. Or maybe some overlap there. On the bottom here, these are Kamala Harris's vowels. So we have, every single token with ellipses for what the space should actually look like. We think, just a quick look, she demonstrates the following CVS features. So she does have boot and put fronting, not so much with boat. So if you look at the oo here, right, that is very fronted for a speaker of her age, right? We expect this for young Californians, but it's a little bit unusual for somebody that's not Californian, that's in their 50s. So this is, for her, likely to be a strong regional feature. We see here some bit-bet overlap here in the middle, kind of not quite bit lowering, but maybe overlap of categories. I'd like a little more data on this. She could be sort of intermediate in this, or it could be interacting with maybe input from the African-American vowel shift, which we'll see here. So comparing her vowels to the African-American vowel shift system, this is from Mary Cohn's 2013 work. So you have your back vowels, your high back vowels in their standard mainstream position. You have a beat-bit reversal or overlap, a bait-bet reversal or overlap, a fronting, and then the low back centralization and a raising. She does have this butt raising, sort of moving towards the middle here, and the bait-bat overlap that we would be expecting to see here. That could be kind of interference because of what happens in the California vowel system with those same front vowels. It's not totally clear which one would be motivating that overlap, but possibly an African-American feature. So we see that she employs features of both the CVS and the AAVS in her debate speech. This aligns with her overtly expressed pride in both her Black identity and her California identity. And this is actually exactly what Podesta et al. Found for Condoleezza Rice, except for that she has Southern and Western vowel systems, and she uses those to sort of align herself in a similarly formal context. So from this, we can see that Harris does some identity work with vowels. It looks like she does, but what about other linguistic levels? And then we're getting to my favorite type of variable, the intonational variation by issue. So folks maybe not as familiar with intonational variables as with vowels, but as I mentioned, it's dramatically understudied and even less studied in varieties of American English than other Englishes. There is some recent sociolinguistic research indicating that pitch, accent type, and contour shape may be a site of variation. So I'll show you some examples of that in a second. And in particular, that it may distinguish mainstream US English from African-American language. Also that these things are tied to identity conceptualization and performance. So it happened that in 2015 and 16, Paul Reed, who's now at the University of Alabama, and Rachel Burdine, who's now at the University of New Hampshire, and myself were all writing variationist linguistic dissertations interested in intonational variables. And we converged on the same one, which is the thing that we will call the L plus H star pitch accent. And that thing seems to be useful for speakers in a variety of linguistic, ethnolinguistic communities. So we will take a look at that in a minute. In my work with Rachel and Paul, we also find that not only the quantity of each pitch and accent type, but the phonetic realization seems to differentiate a number of non-mainstream varieties from each other. In my 2016 dissertation, I did examine these same variables. So I had 25 men with one Black parent and one white parent in DC, and I recorded them in casual peer dyad conversations found a pattern such that the participants who identified more as Black as opposed to multiracial or mixed were more likely to use a greater quantity of this L plus H star pitch accent than the H star one, which this is a pattern that we would expect more from African American speakers than from white speakers, because we believe that L plus H star is more common in some varieties of AAL and therefore possibly a resource in the production or performance of ethnic identity. One limitation of this study is that it was kind of bound by the existing tools for studying variation. We code this data using the mainstream American English TOBY conventions, which were not designed to examine variation at all, and in fact are by design phonetically underspecified, but they're kind of the tools that we have. I find this to be frustrating, so that's not what I'm doing here. Instead, I'm using the polar method. So the vast majority of studies in intonational phonology in the US have coded data using these conventions that I mentioned, but they're not really designed for variation. So On et al. Proposes a new annotation system. It's called polar, points, levels, and ranges in order to capture phonetic detail as well as work on a broader range of linguistic varieties. So this data is coded in the polar method. Because it's intended to capture phonetic detail, the tiers differ from those we might be familiar with from TOBY. So I'm just going to explain this to you and give you an example. There are 4 tiers, and again, we're looking at the level of the intonational phrase, so that might be familiar. There's a prosodic structure tier. This is where we put boundaries, exactly like we would do in TOBY. There's a points tier, so this is new, but it's the moments where the F0 seems to change directions. And levels, which are locally specified F0 movements within a given phrase. It corresponds to the marks on the points tier, but it's derived from information about the points and the range of the phrase itself. And then we have just F0 range within an IP. Here we have the waveform and spectrogram. This is Kamala saying we need the same set of rules for everybody. We got the phrase, we got the words. Here's the prosodic structure tier. I did not put the boundary here. I wasn't interested in boundaries right now. But we have things that sound prominent on both same and everybody. Let me play that for you so you can get a feeling.
We need the same set of rules for everybody.
So when I code with my eyebrows. And my eyebrows go up on same and everybody. So see if you can do it too. Play it one more time.
We need the same set of rules for everybody.
There we go, prominences. And then we can use our eyes and our ears to look for turns in the F0. So we have always a point here where we're starting on this next tier 4. We're going up, we're going down, we're going up, we're going down, right? And we just kind of follow the shape of the F0 here, the pitch contour, and we kind of figure out where there are turns. Then we code the ranges. So in this phrase, she goes between 145 and 300 hertz. That's the total range, the lowest to highest point. And then the levels tier is actually super interesting to me. This is one of the best things I think about the polar system. This jump between we and need, she's at sort of a level 2 in her range for this phrase. And then she goes as high as she goes in the whole phrase. This is a 5, right? As we're moving towards something that's more prominent in need. And then she goes back down 3, and then we get a 5 again in that same syllable, at the end of that same syllable that has the prominence. And then she kind of declines over the course of the phrase. So what we're going to be looking at is comparing the number of points, the number of prosodic structures, and then also these changes in levels and ranges.
We need the same set of rules for everybody.
So again, 2018 intonational phrases, excluding reported speech, false starts, fillers, bad pitch tracking, etc. She's a little creaky. There's overlapping speech. It was coded originally for 12 major topics, and now you're going to see a subset of the 5 most common topics here. The data gets chopped a little too finely when you include everything that she could ever talk about, so we got kind of the heavy hitter topics here. They are climate, gun control, the economy, immigration, and race. And I ran linear mixed effects regression models, accounting for topic by variable. You're going to see them with bootstrapped 95% confidence intervals with the bait number as random effects. So just in case she's changing over time, we're looking at the prominences, the F0 ranges, and the level changes in the phrase. So those 1 to 5 jumps, 2 to 5 jumps, and 1 to 4 jumps. Starting with the ranges, because they're sort of the most intuitive, her whole range in all of these debates is 140 to 350 hertz. The models reveal a significant difference such that F0 max and min is lower. Both of them are lower when she discusses climate. Climate also has a smaller range than the other issues, and the difference is significant on both this high and low ends. But you can see here we have the issues on the x-axis, and this is the mean and the error bars for each of the other issues. Nothing really going on here in differences in the highs or the lows, but climate is different. For the number of prominences, prosodic prominences, we also see significant differences by issue. She has the most prominences when she's discussing climate and race, and the least when she's discussing gun control. I think this might be indicating more speaker engagement, and this kind of roughly corresponds to the existence of pitch accents in Toby. So more prominences could indicate a more AAL style on these issues. And it's important to note that climate and race are not totally independent issues for Harris. So when asked about climate frequently, she talks about climate justice in the context of race. So these issues are linked, obviously. Finally, for the levels, you're looking at the proportion of 1 to 5 jumps. The economy and immigration show the biggest level jumps, though there is a lot of variation. There are very few large level jumps on the issues of climate or gun control. Race is intermediate, possibly indicating involvement or attention retaining strategies on these issues. The levels again represent dramatic local changes, which can be characteristic of male charismatic speech, although we don't know this for women because nobody has bothered to look at it. So in summary for the intonation results, Harris uses a narrower F0 range when discussing climate than other issues, possibly kind of related to her stance on this issue. And she uses more prominences when discussing climate and race. For climate, it actually may interact with what we find for range. So it may be a strategy to sort of invoke speaker engagement without using the wider range. For race, it's possible that this is identity work that aligns herself with AAL norms. So there's sort of a complicated story here in the way in which these issues are linked. And we see the greater local pitch jumps when she discusses economy and immigration. So it's kind of like she's got different prosodic strategies for every issue that she talks about. It makes sense that you would see this on these issues. This local pitch jump is something characteristic of charismatic speech. And these two are the most traditional political issues she discusses in this data set. So she might be sort of targeting a traditional charismatic speech ideal there. We see there are different ways of constructing a charismatic and racialized style by issue via overall range, local changes, and the number of prominences. Okay, so finally, a plot twist here with these morphosyntactic variables. Though AAL is well studied, few studies have examined prosodic features and their relationship to other types of features. But scholars and lay people have posited that for middle-class speakers of AAL, the use of intonational features rather than morphosyntactic ones may be especially important in their performance of their racial identity, right? In particular, Spears argues that the use of AAL intonation in the absence of stigmatized morphosyntactic features may allow middle-class speakers to index Black identity without negative class stereotypes. And I'm going to go one step further and say this might especially be true in formal speech settings like the one we have here, and for people who have sort of complex and dynamic Black identities that they can move in and out of. The stigmatized morphosyntactic features might not be available to them or seen as authentic to them, but the intonational features are available. There's a lot of studies on morphosyntactic variation in AAL. These features have also been the primary focus on studies of systematic linguistic discrimination, partially due to their salience to lay listeners. And in their 2012 study, Podesta et al. Find that Condoleezza Rice uses specific phonological variables to selectively reflect Blackness, but she does not use stigmatized morphosyntactic ones. And she is in a similar kind of formal context there. So I took a list of possible morphosyntactic features of AAL combined from Rickford and Rickford, Van Hofwegen, Wolfram, and Grieser, 2018. Just to give you an idea of what some of these features were, zero pass marking, zero copula, ain't in all of its manifestations, perfective done, is and was leveling, negative concord, existential it, third singular S absence, and variant B preterite had. The range of features is a different project, but I threw the whole kitchen sink at it. Why? Because I didn't think she would have any of them. And because in my 2019 study, I found low rates of use of these variables for the Black biracial speakers, but there was some conditioning by interlocutor and personal racial identity. So importantly, it's not that these speakers used no features that we looked for. They used few, and they used them when they had Black interlocutors, not when they had white interlocutors. That's the story. So kind of following that procedure here. I had 2 expert coders listen for this extensive list of morphosyntactic features of AAL. There's 40 features in total we examined. She uses 0, literally 0, which may be expected because of the formal context as well as other aspects of her background, by virtue of the fact that she is highly educated, Californian, also woman. We might not expect her to be a prolific user of all of these features. However, I think there's something going on with her auxiliaries, and there are people in the audience that might be able to help me figure this out a little bit more, I hope. Dude gotta go. So you see in the first GIF here on the left, this is her saying that in a debate. And then it's very well received, so she continues to say it on the campaign trail. Dude here, of course, is Trump. Oh, I didn't even play it. Could play.
Dude gotta go. Dude gotta go. Dude gotta go.
Dude gotta go. Oh, that's great. Other examples of her doing this in the speeches. In debate 1, she says, because I'ma tell you there's some I'ma phenomena going on. She does it again in debate 2. In debate 5, she says the issue has to be how we gonna win. There's definitely no rhotic. It's not where. I've looked. And in debate 4, she also says, she uses a gun. I don't really think this impeachment process is going to take very long. Interesting. What do I think is happening here? Well, above it all, way back in the day, described am is going to and has got to is subject to morphological condensation among Black speakers. Importantly, this is a phonological process on multiple morphemes with the potential to become lexicalized, but there is still a paucity of work on this. I had to ask colleagues in other countries to track down this Bailey and Schneble article for me. And Bonnie McElhaney wrote about this with working class white speakers, this kind of ox deletion phenomenon. In the hour of speech, here she uses none of the 40 AL features we looked for, but this ox pattern is kind of weird for a white speaker, and we know that from McElhaney's work. I think this is a camouflaged feature, possibly characteristic of SAE. So one thing I didn't tell you about before is that Spears posits that even though these speakers might not use stigmatized morphosyntactic features of AAE, it's not that they don't use any. They use the ones that are not the subject of overt commentary. And I think this could be going on with her. So Harris uses her vowel space to position herself as both Californian and African-American, supporting her explicit identity stances. She constructs a charismatic African-American political persona via the use of issue-specific prosodic strategies that may also affect her racial alignment at times. And she uses none of a wide range of AAL morphosyntactic features, but she has some previously underdescribed patterns of auxiliary use that may indicate camouflaged forms typical of standard African-American English. This, if this is what she's doing, would be a valuable strategy politically to avoid stigma while still reflecting a Black identity and positive associations with a non-standard AAL. So she gets all of the coolness, all of the covert prestige of AAE without the stigma that can sometimes be attached to it. I think that's sort of the target here. Politicians, especially those with multifaceted racial, gender, and ethnic identities, can be a site for rich analysis of persona construction on multiple linguistic levels. These findings evidence the need for much more study on politicians, Black women, multiracial Americans, and middle-class Black speakers. I don't have studies to compare her to any of these for the variables I looked at because they don't exist. Mostly. And this complicates our pictures of charismatic speech, authentic racial linguistic performance, and iconic speakerhood. So who is she as an iconic speaker? These are people that helped me with pieces of this research, and you guys know how to find me. I'm on Twitter, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. While we wait for everyone to type their questions in, and please do, everyone. Just a reminder: if you have questions, please put them in the ask a question box. I guess I'll start since I have a question. So one thing I was wondering was, you talked about audience design. You talked about the sort of strategies, terms like this, but, which raise questions about deliberateness, right? The extent to which people are making conscious decisions about how they want to speak, adjust. And I'm wondering, first of all, whether you can sort of speculate about how much that's the case here. And maybe I also thought in the context of morphosyntactic versus intonational variables, it'd be interesting to know whether some of these variables are maybe more something that she or other politicians consciously play with, and other things which are maybe less under conscious control.
Yeah, this is a good question. She's coached for sure, right? So politicians are always coached, particularly in debates. They have some sort of predetermined zingers, right? Like, this is gonna be the way I'm gonna land. And I can't say that that's not the case with Dude Gotta Go, but just because she may have thought of it ahead of time doesn't mean it's not something she would actually say. So we have a little bit of a blurred line of how much of this is performance under her control. I think with the intonational variables, it's very hard to do them online. When I've asked speakers, they say, like, I just have a style. Like, here's my Black style. No idea what the features are. So she could be consciously going, like, now I'm in my Black style, but she's not going, let me use more L plus H star pitch accents. With something like these ox phenomena, or maybe even with the vowels to a certain extent, she may be able to do that consciously, although the cognitive load would probably be pretty high. So I think we're getting, the way that she is trying to talk is what's coming out, like something that she's desiring to do, but maybe not the specific features.
Thank you. So we actually have a question that's just popped up from Dan Roma. Can you maybe say a bit more about what charismatic speech is? And there's a whole
book called Vocal Attractiveness that came out last year, and I cite a lot the work of Julia Hirschberg and Andrew Rosenberg. It's kind of a moving target, right? So basically, the theory is that anything prosodic that grabs attention can be used for vocal attractiveness, but these features don't work the same way for all speakers. So for example, a simple example is like amplitude. Sometimes it's really great if speakers are using high amplitude, right? We kind of want them to be loud, but this can go wrong, right? So it's kind of like they're all forming speaker-specific ways of using prosodic variables in a range that appeals to their speakers and works for their identities. So I'm thinking now about like that time that Howard Dean said, like, we're going to New Hampshire, and then it was like, yeehaw, and then people thought he was unhinged. Too much amplitude, right? But if he was quiet all the time like this, that would also not be seen as charismatic speech. So it's like she has some prosodic resources available to her, but not all of them all the time. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
So the next question comes from Swingley. I think I take to be Dan Swingley. So the question is, I sometimes feel like I have a sort of dial I can crank that's like, approach my interlocutor, and I'll crank it depending on the social situation. From your talk, it seems like it's not just one dial, but a super articulated set of levers. Has everybody got that set of refinements, or just the pros?
I think everybody's got them. So, I didn't talk about accommodation here, although clearly she's not in a vacuum, right? She's on a debate stage and she's next to Biden and sometimes specifically addressing other people. And so it might be the case that you can be sort of pushed by what's going on. And that's part of what we think is happening with audience design and referee design. But I think people do sort of have like this is my target style, like, or I want to sound like this based on my exemplars or something like this. And then I'm going to approximate it given the structures that are available to me, right? So not just the ones that are part of my grammar, but the ones that I feel like I'm licensed to use. And I think we see her doing that.
I mean, a follow-up question, I guess, from me related to do you think some people have better control over the dials, or a kind of fancier set of dials? I mean, that certainly to me feels, I mean, there's some work on this, right, as well. And I mean, it also feels to me intuitively as if that might be the
when
case.
so I did my PhD at NYU with Renee Blake, and when I started, I was like, I study mixed people, so interesting. And Renee was like, mixed people are not special. And I was like, huh? And then the more I did this work, I was like, mixed people are not special. But I think they're still interesting. And I think they're as interesting as middle-class Black folks or Black folks with parents who immigrated from other places, because what these groups have in common is sort of conflicting social pressure and possibly sufficient input from multiple varieties to really command them in ways that are very specific. And I think that's what you see with Kamala Harris is she knows mainstream US English, and she also knows AAL, and she has a lot of input from, this is the kind of speaker that I can, aspire to sounding like, and this is the kind of speaker that I cannot aspire to sounding like. So I think there is something sort of in common among people who have these kind of complex identities having more practice controlling those levers in very specific ways.
Thank you. Question from Joe Cable. Is vowel use something that varies over time or could differ for different issues, such that she could stress her Californian or Black identities?
Yes, so I don't think necessarily that, as I was doing the issue analysis of the intonation, I found some things. I don't know that this is the right data set for that in her vowels, but if you had her in Oakland giving a rally and then you had her in, somewhere else giving a rally, I would actually expect to see some differences. And maybe that's somewhere to go for future work.
Awesome. Question from Russell Ritchie. I might have missed this, but what is known about how Kamala's, or other politicians for that matter, pardon me, that's from me, not from the question. I might have missed this. What's known about how Kamala's, or other politicians for that matter, variation is perceived by listeners? E.g., who notices that she signals her Kali identity through her vowels, through her vowels, for example? What about the do gotta go? Do people perceive that as Black?
That's a good question. I think, maybe it's kind of like she's giving us these explicit and implicit messages, and eventually we're supposed to get there. So one thing, when she was having her campaign rallies, she always played California musical artists. So she's trying to get into your subconscious to be like, California, California. And maybe the vowels are doing the same thing. Aleem and Smitherman do claim that Obama, they have sort of data from how people talk about Obama. And Black speakers being like, he sounds Black, but not too Black. And white speakers being like, oh, he's just so charismatic, but he's also so cool. So they're using these kind of things that are proxies for their racial identity. They're hearing him as just Black enough, and he's walking this kind of linguistic tightrope. So as far as the specific features, we can't really know how much people are picking up on these, but as the style, they are. And I do my 2020 paper with Dan Villarreal. It's called How Black Does Obama Sound Now? And we manipulated some intonational contours and just kept asking people, how Black does Obama sound? How Black does Obama sound? How Black does Obama sound? And it turns out that when he has more extreme realizations of the L+H star pitch accent, people will say that he sounds Blacker. So there is some evidence that people are able to do that, at least in a kind of experimental situation.
Such cool work there. So a question from Andrea Beltrama. Thanks, Nicole. Great talk as always. I wondered if we see this crafty construction of a non-standard register, in domains other than intonation or morphosyntactic variables. In particular, I'd be interested to know if you have any thought as to how this process happens at the pragmatic level as well. Did you notice any pattern in terms of particular discourse markers she uses, for instance, or other types of expression that we know tend to be very salient for disruptive identity?
Yeah, not so much in this data set, but I think if you looked at what's going on with Pence, like when you have her in this one-on-one debate with Mike Pence, what she does when he interrupts her is different than what he does when she interrupts him. So he will appeal to authority whenever she talks over him, and she talks over him less than he talks over her. But he'll be like, she's talking over me. He tells the teacher, right? She very calmly, in that gift that I showed you at the beginning, I'm speaking. And then she lets there be a deafening pause. Right. So I think you get some sort of time and turn pragmatic differences that I haven't looked at, but I definitely do think that the pragmatics are operational and probably quite functional for her as well. And of course they differ, right? Norms of that type differ for African-American speakers than for white speakers, especially like pause length and things like that. So that's something to look at in the future too.
Cool. A question from Dillian Sankoff. Could you address the issue of spontaneity? Does your data on Kamala Harris contain any instances where she spontaneously seems to blurt something that she later seems embarrassed about?
Oh, she's so polished, right? So you do see that with almost every politician, but she never walks back anything in these speeches anyway, right? She's just like, but this is also the style that she's known for, right? When she was when there was the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, she was a relentless prosecutor. Like she takes no prisoners and there are no apologies. There's one moment where she kind of gets into a back and forth with Tulsi Gabbard that seems to be like totally backstage speech. And I looked at that specifically to see if it violated any of the general things that I was seeing, and no. So even when she's having this kind of bitter exchange from both ends, she's still kind of consistent in her style as far as what I've seen. But yeah, I think I do have speech from her doing weird things at rallies that I'm looking at now, and I think you might see some of that more there, where she's just a little off the cuff.
One question I actually had was, so you mentioned a lot of, and I think actually I've mentioned this to you before in person, but so, you mentioned various components of Kamala Harris's identity before. And one of the ones that you mentioned is the South Asian component to identity, which you then didn't really come up later. I mean, do you find, is that something that she also indexes? Have you found, does that play any role in this?
There's a few problems, right? One, we don't really know who to compare her to, right? Like, okay, people who are Black and Indian with Indian parents, there's no kind of natural, well-described variety to go back to. So that's something. There's also the question of what happens to kids acquiring English from parents whose L1 is not their same variety of English, which is kind of underdescribed. As far as that goes, also, and maybe this isn't really her, but her identities kind of get ranked because in the United States, we can't deal with racial complexity very well. So it's very clear that she is a woman, and then Black, and then multiracial, and then South Asian, and then at the very bottom, Jamaican. So I've talked about this research before, and I had a question from someone that said, nobody ever talks about how she's Jamaican. I'm like, it's just so much less salient. So I think it's true that her South Asian identity is less salient than some of the others, but she has explicit performances of it. So when she accepts the VP nomination and she's thanking everybody, she's like, and I want to thank, and she thanks the women in her sorority and she thanks her aunties. And then in Tamil, she thanks her chitis. So this is a very explicit sort of reaching out to that community and reminding us that that's something that she's doing. But I think that those are kind of more overt for her than some of the other identity stuff she's doing.
Great, thank you. Are there any more questions from anyone in the audience? I'm just checking I haven't missed anything in the lots of wonderful words. Thanks so much. Lots of very positive notes in the chat. But otherwise, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both. And for a fascinating talk. I was Googling some of the terms as you went along, but I'm really going to be listening for a lot of these things going forward. I pasted our speakers that are coming up in the following weeks. And so next week, we'll actually be joined by our postdoc, the MindCORE fellow, Jessie Sun. And so please join us back here. I was going to paste a link to her work, which I can do sort of after we finish. But thank you, Nicole and Gareth, very much.
Thank you.